I'd like to begin with a special welcome and thanks to Dr. Ron Whelan, COO of Discovery Health, who with his team has been a constant source of invaluable information and insight for the GBS sector in all matters related to COVID health. Ron, thanks again for your selfless approach to the role you perform outside of your day job in the B4SA team, working with business and government to plan and manage the rollout of the national vaccination program under the government's initiative. As you're aware, we have BPO operators, we have their clients and shareholders on the call who have real concerns about the status of the pandemic in South Africa and our plans and ability to deal with it, to ensure that we can continue to deliver our services without degradation and that we can open the economy further, including for safe international travel without putting others at risk in due course. We also have some of our analyst partners and global association partners on the call who are eager to hear the facts from South Africa so they can inform their own commentary and provide advice to their stakeholders on a fact basis. I also want to thank all the participants on the call for making the time to listen and engage with Ron on this all-important matter. And I really hope that this session helps you address the queries and concerns that you may have personally and those of your key stakeholders. Lastly, I'd like to thank Fran for the great relationship that she's built between BPSA, the GBS sector, and Discovery Health, and for arranging this session for all of us for tonight. Lastly, Ron, I understand that the call is being recorded, but that you're happy that it can be shared after this session to this group and also to our broader stakeholder community. And with that, Ron, I'd like to hand over to you and thank you very much indeed.
Many thanks for the introduction, Andy, and yeah, thank you for hosting me today. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight working with you and the BPSA team over the last several months. The work you do is incredibly important to South Africa and to us at Discovery. You've been enormous pillars of strength for us as we navigate the pandemic and our call center staff. I'm going to put up a few slides that I pulled together for this presentation. As with all of my presentations and webinars, I try and keep them as light as possible and keep them more sort of visual than too much text. So we should be able to move through this quite quickly. We'll aim to do sort of 20-25 minutes of presentation and then aim for a rich Q&A towards the end of that. So let me jump in and share screen and so that we can get going. Andy, Fran, can you just confirm that the screen is up and displaying correctly?
Yeah, all visible. Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Good stuff. So, as Andy mentioned, I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Discovery Health. I'm also head of Discovery's COVID-19 task team, and then I'm working together with Adrian and many of our senior execs around the vaccine acquisition for South Africa. So we're really at the middle of the COVID-19 response in South Africa. I'm going to cover three main topics here during this afternoon's webinar. Firstly, a very brief update on the South Africa situation. And then we're going to jump into quite a detailed session around variants and vaccines. There's been a lot of development around variants in the last week or so, and quite a lot of development around vaccines as well, not only in South Africa, but also globally. And in fact, if we'd had this webinar a week before, I think half of the insights from today's webinars probably wouldn't have been available. That's how quickly the landscape is moving. But let's start out with a quick South Africa update, just to give you a sense on what's happening in South Africa at the moment. So this is the incidence chart for South Africa the whole way through the pandemic. And so you'll see that wave one hit South Africa and around about mid-July, peaked at an incidence rate of 20.9 per 100,000 population per day. Then just come through a wave two, and you can see on this how steep the trajectory for wave two was, both on the upward trajectory as well as the downward trajectory. So we peaked at roughly 1.5 times the wave one peak. at 31.5 new infections per 100,000 population per day. Delighted to let you know that we're now down to an incidence rate of 5.9, and you can see how steeply this has dropped off since the first week in January. So over the last 3 weeks, it's been a dramatic decline. In fact, in the last week or so, infections have dropped off by 50% on their own, and we're seeing that manifestation across the Discovery base, both in terms of your testing as well as in terms of your hospital admissions. What's also happening is we're seeing the pattern happen across all 9 provinces in South Africa. So you'll see quite a broad set of peaks across your wave 1 across the different provinces, starting out with the Western Cape. The dark blue line is Gauteng. The orange line is your Free State, but a much broader base in the first wave across the other provinces, and then a much steeper, narrower peak in the second wave. The fortunate thing is, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is a steep decline across all of the provinces. Quite an interesting pattern, in fact. When you look at some of the trajectories across Europe and other countries, you don't typically see this steep downward trajectory, as I'll demonstrate in a few slides to come. This is an interesting chart just to give you a sense on the Discovery experience. So these are daily new hospital admissions across Discovery Health. And as you know, Discovery Health is the biggest health insurer, private health insurer across South Africa, with somewhere around 40% market share, 3.5 million members. So we've got a good sense on what's happening in the landscape. And what you'll notice from this is wave 1, we peaked at 300 new hospital admissions a day. And wave 2, we peaked at 520 new hospital admissions a day. So roughly a 70% increase in wave 2. And I can tell you, we felt this during the last week in December and first week in January. Hospitals were under pressure across the country. Started out in the Eastern Cape, moved down to the Western Cape, and then we felt pressure across Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal during the first week in January. It got quite tight at stages. So at stages we needed to transfer patients across the country so that we could make sure that everyone had ICU beds. We were working very closely with all of the hospital groups to make sure that everyone got an ICU bed and needed to move your patients across the system. Delighted to let you know that the system managed to cope even under that significant stress. And I think is real testimony to the healthcare infrastructure and capacity in South Africa. Effectively, we've got 2 healthcare systems in South Africa, a public system and a private system. And I can tell you across the Gauteng province, Gauteng, which is right at the heartbeat of the South African economy, Johannesburg and Pretoria located in Gauteng, we've got the equivalent hospital bed capacity to any developed market country, most developed market economies. And I think it gives you a sense on the healthcare infrastructure that's available across South Africa that allowed us to manage the severe pressure we were under as a result of COVID at the end of December and beginning of January. Moving forward, just to give you a sense on how South Africa compares to the European trajectories. So what we've done here is we've transposed the South African trajectories across the European trajectories. So the brown line is South Africa. The blue line is a cluster of European markets. What we've also had to do is South Africa had an early lockdown, and the early lockdown meant that South Africa bought 75 days before the first wave outbreak. That 75 days allowed us to prepare the healthcare system, hospital beds, allowed for the evidence to emerge, so really helped South Africa navigate the pandemic. So what we've done is we've adjusted the curves to pull the curve back by 75 days to get a sense on what the difference was between the South African and European trajectories in first wave and then in second wave. And as you'll see from this, South Africa had a pretty severe first wave in comparison with Europe. So about double the European first wave. Then had a second wave that was 1.5 times the size of the first wave. But you can see what's happened in Europe, a very, very severe second wave. Most of this, by the way, driven by increased testing rates, so picking up more infections, but certainly a severe second wave across Europe. But what's also happened across Europe is sort of this V-shaped curve. So they went down and then went up again. And this was a very interesting trajectory. And we certainly hope this doesn't happen with South Africa. And I'll explain why we think that won't happen in South Africa in a moment. Moving forward, the same chart, just charting mortality rates. So to give you a sense on, so you'll remember on the previous page, Europe had low infection, but now you'll see that Europe had very high fatality rates in the first wave. Very simple reason for that, in that when Europe went through its first wave, we didn't yet know how to treat COVID appropriately. So we didn't know things about your high flow oxygen. We didn't know about your dexamethasone and all of the treatments available. So this resulted in a lot of deaths in Europe in the first wave. South Africa's mortality rate in the first wave was much lower because of the 75 days that we saved through the hard lockdown. The 75 days, as I mentioned on the previous slide, allowed us to both prepare the healthcare system as well as for the science to emerge on how to treat COVID. And you can see what impact that had on mortality rates in the first wave. We saved many, many thousands of lives, and I'm very proud of what South Africa was able to do there. The second wave has been much more severe from a mortality rate perspective, and I'll explain on the next few slides why that was the case. And then you'll see that the European fatality rates were quite high in the second wave as well, but roughly the same as the first wave fatality rates. Fortunately, we're seeing South Africa's fatality rate fall off a cliff here. So let's speak a little bit about why this happened, that South Africa had both the steep upward trajectory and steep downward trajectory. And let's speak a little bit about why South Africa had a higher fatality rate. And it all blends into the variant discussion. So the variant is what's largely driven some of the challenges in South Africa, and is a big warning for the rest of the globe around the impact of variants, because none of us are immune to variants, as you'll see in the pages to come. So what we dug into in South Africa is to try and get a sense on whether mortality rates, actual mortality rates, were different between wave 1 and wave 2. And as you'll see from the data here from the Department of Health in the Western Cape, and I'm not going to go through all of the detail around the slide. I'll show you how to navigate the slide. So we compared early wave 1 to wave 2, and then we had all of the intermediate phases in between. So that's the color coding for the charts. If you look at the over 70 category here, what you'll notice is that the wave 1 mortality rate, compared to the wave 2 mortality rate, is roughly the same. It's statistically insignificant. So you end up with similar mortality rates between wave 1 and wave 2. This is hospital mortality rates. And then you'll see the intermediate waves were roughly the same. And the scientists have analyzed this, and the conclusion is that actual mortality, so the lethality of the virus between wave 1 and 2 was no different. So then it begs the question, well, why did we see such a high rate of deaths in wave 2? And the following slide from the London School of Tropical Hygiene explains this to us. So South Africa had an increasing prevalence of the new variant that started to emerge in November last year, in fact, late October last year. And the variant was proven to be more transmissible, but equally deadly. And what you'll see from this page here is, if you had to make the choice between a variant that is more transmissible, the blue line here, or a variant that is more lethal, the green line, you would choose the green line any day of the week, because what happens with viruses that are more infectious is that they infect larger portions of the population. If they're infecting larger portions of the population on the same mortality rate, you end up with increased deaths over time. And this is really what happened in South Africa in October, November, is a new variant increased the infection rates, broader swaths of the population who were infected, same mortality rate, yes, the same portion of your deaths, but just a much bigger outbreak. Whereas if we had a virus that was equally infectious but had a greater mortality rate, we would have followed this sort of line here. And this is really, really important, because what we're seeing across the other variants, most notably in the UK and Brazil, is that they are also increasingly infectious. In fact, equally as infectious as the variant that's manifested in South Africa. So about 50% more contagious. And I think that's why when you look at the UK trajectories, you see similar trajectories in terms of your deaths. So that's a little bit of a South Africa update. I think to summarize that, we're through the first wave. We're through a very tough second wave. The health system was able to cope with the second wave. Quite a big portion of the population will now have some level of immunity against the virus. So while we're expecting there will likely be a third wave and potentially even a fourth wave, those waves will be much lower, much lower, because we've had such extensive first and second waves. That may not be the case for other countries. So I think as I'll demonstrate on a few slides to come, I think the US is potentially at risk. Europe is certainly at risk, and there is a chance that those waves are going to be equal, if not higher, than their second waves. So moving ahead to the explanation around the variants, and I'd like to use the section to perhaps demystify some of the facts and figures around your variants. To understand variants, you need to understand the coronavirus, and this is a close-up conceptual image of the coronavirus. Three important features of this. The first thing is this RNA strand in the inside. Effectively, that's the code for the coronavirus. So what happens is a coronavirus attaches to your cells, it releases this RNA strand, the RNA strand replicates. Each one of these strands has got sequences of RNA and the proverbial code. So tiny sequences made up of small protein molecules. The second feature I want to demonstrate on the coronavirus is this blue shell here. It's called a protein lipid shell. And the protein lipid shell is important in that most viruses have a protein shell, which makes it really hard and hard to destroy. Coronavirus is unique in that it's got protein and lipid, and we all know that lipid is dissolved by soap. That's why soap works against the coronavirus. And then probably the most important feature in relation to vaccines and the variant is this red piece here. This is called a glycoprotein spike. Think of this as the landing gear for the coronavirus. If you were flying to the moon, you would have landing gear. This is the landing gear on any one of your cells. So this is how the coronavirus attaches to your cells. Why is this important? Well, this is important for two reasons. The first thing is this is where the mutations have happened on the spikes of the coronavirus. So here's where we've ended up with some of the challenges. So it's increased the stickiness of the spikes, if you will, for attaching to cells. The second reason the glycoprotein spikes is important is this is what the vaccines have been designed to combat. So we'll jump into some detail around how that works. The coronavirus, as you'll see on this page here, is this is what the virus looks like. This is the RNA sequence inside the coronavirus. You see specific parts of the RNA manifest as specific parts of the actual coronavirus. So this red part here creates the glycoprotein spike. And then the other parts here create different parts of the virus, so the shell and then the insides of the virus. It's the same way your body works. Certain parts of your DNA make your ears, certain parts of your DNA make your eyes, certain parts of your DNA make your hands and your arms, and so on and so forth. So what's happened in the variant is that there's been a very tiny mutation on some of the spike sequences. The spike gene, specifically V117 lineage gene, and that sequence has changed in this area here. It's called the N501Y mutation. So tiny change across that mutation there has resulted in a change in the manifestation of the spikes. Because the spikes are now slightly different, it makes it more infectious. Same thing has happened in the variant out of Brazil. Same thing has happened in the variant out of the UK. And same thing has happened in the variant out of South Africa. And I'll show you what you'll see on this image here is the glycoprotein spike attaching to a receptor on any one of your cells. And as you'll see there, the tip of the glycoprotein spike is this N501Y piece. And that's where the mutation is at, the tiny mutation there, just to give you a sense. So this is where the connection happens. So we've got increased stickiness around how this variant now works. Three types of variants, very easy, and unfortunately the media and the scientists have confused this, but effectively we've got N501Y version 1, commonly known as the UK variant, an N501Y version 2, commonly known as the South Africa variant, and an N501Y version 3, known as the Brazilian variant. I mean, that's your very logical labeling. They're sometimes known as the B117, the B1351, and the P1. But they effectively are three different variants, three different versions of a 501 mutation. You'll see that there's a small number of mutations, so 23 mutations in the 501V1, 21 in the V2, and 17 in the V3. And they've affected about 8 parts of the spike, and 9 parts of the spike, and 10 parts of the spike. So that's the nomenclature. I'm not going to go through much more detail than that, other than to say that what's happened across these variants is that they have increased the transmissibility by about 40 to 50%. So recent studies now show that the South Africa variant is 50% more transmissible. Same as the UK variant, increasing the transmissible. What we're seeing, though, is lethality, as I mentioned on the previous page, is the same. So lethality has not gone up. But transmissibility is a problem. So that's an overview of how the variants work and what the mutations look like. I think importantly to note, though, is that viruses mutate over time. So every time they replicate those RNA sequences, there are mutations that happen. It's like creating copies. If you're creating multiple copies, there's always a chance that you're going to miss a letter here, miss a letter there, transpose a letter here. And this is a picture that illustrates the number of mutations that have happened in the coronavirus since December last year. You'll see we ended up with this sort of, it was called the 19B variant in the early parts of the year. We then had a 20A variant that just spread through from March until about June. Then we had this sort of dominant pattern of a mix of the 20Bs and the 20C variants, with a smattering of 20E that came into the mix. I put up this page just to give you a sense on how the virus evolves. Variants are not new. These variants out of the UK, Brazil, and South Africa are not uncommon. Viruses mutate all of the time. It's a manifestation of those mutations that are different. So by and large, most of the mutations up until now were relatively inert, so it didn't cause massive changes to the way the virus acts. That only started happening when the mutations affected this 501Y gene, as I mentioned on the previous page. And there were 3 changes in the 501Y, as I mentioned, so version 1, version 2, version 3. And you can see the orange dots here is where the new variant started to emerge. So it started in around about October last year, has grown in prevalence. You can see how many orange dots now we have on gene sequencing. And then we still have the 20Cs, 20Ds, and 20Es there. So that's how this has progressed over time. And you can see across this page the different types of variants across your different countries. So South Africa, for example, has a predominance now of the N501V2 variant. The UK has a predominance of the version 1 variant. The US has a mix of variants at the moment. Various other countries have different mixes of variants. So each country is sitting with a basket of different variants that they're dealing with, and these variants are moving over time. So for instance, what is happening is that the B117 variant from the UK is spreading now across Europe and also spreading into the US. There's been 1 or 2 cases of the South Africa variant picked up in the US as well. And then the US is developing its own variants, because what happens in any population is you develop your own variants over time. So that's, I kind of put up this page just to demystify variants. Variants are common. Many of them are inert. Sometimes they turn aggressive. We will continue to have variants going forward. This is what's happened in the 3 main types of variants that we're all talking about at the moment. So you'll see on the UK variants, they went through a 19A, a 20A, a 20D, a 20B, and so on and so forth. And now they have a predominance of this 501 version Y variant as of the 20th of December. South Africa, on the other hand, is a predominance of the version 2 variant. And you can see roughly 80% of our new infections in South Africa are now the version 2 variant. In a similar way in the UK, 90-95% of infections are on the 501 version 1 variant. And then in Brazil, roughly 30% of infections are in the version 3. Brazil, interestingly, has only had 3 different variants up until now. South Africa has had 3, and then I think there was a smaller resurgence here. But look at the variety across the UK variants over time. And this is, I think, speaks to the morphing of the variants. What happened, though, is in the UK, when this 501YV1 manifest in the middle of November, look what happened to the blue line here around infections, and look what happened to the brown line here around mortality rates. And you see the transmissibility of the virus went up as a result of the V1 variant. Very interesting, and on the back of increased transmission, you ended up with increased deaths. That was as a direct result of the variant in the UK. In fact, you could notice how the UK probably would have come down if there wasn't a variant that emerged in mid-November. South Africa is quite a similar picture. So the South Africa variant was picked up in the middle of October, and what happened? We saw this very, very sharp upward spike and this very sharp downward spike as a result of the 501V2 variant. And mortality rates largely tracked the infection spikes. So a very similar picture around new variant comes in, increasingly transmissible, increasing mortality rates. What is quite concerning from a global level is that globally, the 3 new variants are starting to proliferate. And this has been, when you look at the world, this has been the variants that we've seen across the globe, so the 19A, 19B, 20A, 20B, and so on and so forth. We're starting to see increasing spread of variants. And as I mentioned 2 slides back, we will see more variants going forward as the virus continues to mutate. It's not as stable as we thought it was going to be. Take a look at what's happening in the US. So the US at the moment is seeing an uptick in the new, this is the B117s, otherwise known as the V1 variant. Can you see how the US numbers are picking up? So the variant is now growing exponentially. In fact, it's doubling on a weekly basis in the US. Here's the Florida picture, even steeper. Here's a California picture, almost as steep. So what we're seeing in the US now is that the UK variant, the B117 or version 1 variant, is really picking up. And as it picks up pace, there's more chance that it mutates, there's more chance that it becomes more transmissible and lethal. In fact, projections, and this is a mathematical model from out of various universities in California, is that by the 23rd of March, the B117 variant will be responsible for 50% of the cases in the US. So right now we're there. The projection is 23rd of March, B117 will be 50% of cases, and by the end of April, that'll be 90% of cases in the US. So this suggests that the US is actually potentially in quite a precarious position when you look forward for the next few months. Europe, this is Canada, similar picture for Canada. So what you'll notice on Canada, that there was a downward trajectory on infections on the old variants, and now there's an upward trajectory on the B117 variant. So this red line, So Canada, similar to the US, by April the 3rd, you'll see a predominance of the B117 variant in Canada. And this is an implication not only on infections, but also on vaccine efficacy. So the learnings we're making in South Africa are really important for both the US and Canada when it comes to variants. Similar picture for Denmark. Look at Denmark's picture here, the B117 variant here growing, the old variants declining. Similar picture for Switzerland. The new variants here increasing. I think that was Geneva. This one is for Switzerland. And I think what this speaks to is we're about 2 months out from the B117 or the UK variant or the N501 V1 variant being predominant across Europe and in the US. We're also in a precarious position in that there'll be ongoing mutation of that variant. So while South Africa is in a tough situation now, I think all suggestions are that if there's not aggressive enough vaccination out of Europe and the US, there's an even more precarious position for the US and Europe. Importantly, the difference between the UK variant and the South Africa variant is one single mutation. So I said they're both N501Y mutations, that yellow dot there. There's a small mutation called the E484K. Some people refer to this as the EEC mutation or the ERIC mutation to kind of bring it to life. It's that E484K mutation that has been proving problematic in terms of vaccinations in South Africa. And it's really this one that has reduced the efficacy of vaccinations in South Africa. The important thing around the E484K mutation is that that could easily happen in the UK variant as well as it happened in South Africa. So there's learning in this UK variant is not necessarily immune to seeing that same mutation happen in the UK variant. Play that across the growth in that variant across Europe and the US, and I think you can imagine what would potentially happen. And of course, we've already seen that. So this is the very latest article out of the British public health out of England. They've detected an EEC or an ERIC mutation in the B117 variant in the UK. So as I said to you on this page, we would have predicted that there was a chance that this variant would pick up a mutation. It's now just as of the last week or so that picked up an E484 mutation, which is very, very concerning. And as I mentioned on the previous page, has serious implications on vaccine efficacy. So in many respects, the UK and Europe and US could be in a very similar position to South Africa in 3 to 4 months' time, and lots of learnings that we can take from the South Africa experience on that. So that's a very deep dive on variants, a very quick update on vaccines. I think the important thing on vaccines is that vaccines work on, let's focus on the immune response first. You get two responses from vaccines. Firstly, you get what's called T-cell immunity or called cellular immunity. That's where the CD8 cells create immunity, and then you get CD4 cells that create immunity. So this is an important part of vaccines. The second thing that vaccines do is they create B-cell immunity, or otherwise known as the B cells make antibodies. So antibodies are then produced by vaccines. And vaccines elicit this response within your body. So basically you put an mRNA sequence in, or you put a viral sequence in, and then it makes your body responds by creating T cells and B cells and making antibodies. If you introduce a prior variant, if you're exposed to a prior variant, you would make T cells and B cells that attack the prior variant. If you then introduce the new variant, you would make T cells and B cells that attack the new variant. So that's the principles around vaccines. What we are seeing around South Africa at the moment is some reinfection rates or repeat positive tests. This is we think the reason this is happening in South Africa is that people in June and July were infected by the old variant and are now being infected by the new variant. Fortunately, and the really good news on this is that repeat infections are very low, so about 0.3% repeat infections. 3 out of 1,000 repeat infections. In fact, we have 3 or 4 studies prove that it's that low. So we've analyzed the Discovery database, and we've analyzed the NICD database, and we've looked at your global research around that as well. So fortunately, it remains low, but I think is a risk given the new variants coming into play. And this is likely to manifest across other countries as well, and that you start to see increasing reinfection rates because of new variants emerging. And the reason that happens is, as I explained on the previous slide, is that you produce T cells and B cells that attack the prior variants, and then when you reinfect it, you've got to produce another set of T cells and B cells that then attack that variant. So that's the reason you end up with new infections. From a vaccine perspective, just a very brief update on vaccines. This is the efficacy of the flu vaccine, just to help you calibrate. So we've got data from the CDC for the flu vaccine all the way from 2004 to 2018. Have a look at these rates, folks. An average efficacy rate of 40% on the flu vaccine, and yet we all take the flu vaccine every year. In fact, 2014 it dropped as low as 19%, in 2018, 29%. So this is I think it just illustrates to you how good the coronavirus vaccines are. So the Pfizer vaccine at 95%, the Moderna vaccine at just about the same levels. Even AstraZeneca at 66% on the new variant is just spectacular results we've seen on vaccines, particularly when you compare it to previous rates on flu. We do have a challenge, however, is that the current vaccines and mix, so these are designed against the old variant. So you'll see the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, 95% effective against the older variants, Moderna 94%, AstraZeneca 65%, J&J 66%, Novavax 89%, Sputnik 92%. So that's the efficacy against the old variant. And South Africa now leading the pack on the understanding the new variant, is starting to look at their vaccine efficacy around the new variant. And just had very disconcerting results over the last 2 days, and that the AstraZeneca vaccine has dropped to 22% efficacy against the new variant. Similarly, the J&J vaccine has dropped off a little bit as well. And the Novavax vaccine was 89% effective against the old variant, is now 49% effective against the new variant. The big question mark is where Pfizer and Moderna sit around the efficacy around the new variant. We don't have clinical studies on that, and we're hopeful that it remains high, but I think it's reasonable to expect that they will drop off to a certain degree as well. And we've got extensive learning around South Africa now around how effective these vaccines are on the new variant, and I think is really going to be helpful for our European and our US colleagues around figuring out how to manage your vaccination programs in the context of new variants. And then I guess to finish off, South Africa's got a very well structured and architected vaccination program. We've got a 3-phase program starting out with healthcare workers. We'll kick off within the next 2 weeks on vaccinating healthcare workers. We're working on securing supply for phase 2, which includes essential workers and people over the age of 60 and so on and so forth. And then the rest of the adult population in phase 3. We need somewhere in the order of 56.5 million doses to complete this program, 25 million doses in the first 2 phases. We are hunting hard for these doses at the moment. We've so far secured in the order of 45 million doses, so we're well on our way to the target. We're trying to push those doses forward, and I'm feeling quite optimistic and confident around our vaccine program. The spanner in the works around the vaccine program, and I think many other countries will experience this now as well, is that we've got to tailor the vaccines towards the new variant. So it is going to be challenging, but we certainly are going to learn stuff that will not only be to the benefit of South Africa, but also to the world more broadly. And then to finish off with, I think one of the things I'm really happy to see is this is a recent study around vaccine uptake in South Africa done by Ipsos, 10,000 people surveyed around whether you would take the COVID vaccination. 67% said yes, 15% said they don't know, and 18% said no. And in global standards, getting 67% to say yes is spectacular. South Africa's always run very strong vaccination programs, and there's always been good vaccine uptake. The immunization system in South Africa works very well on the back of very good healthcare infrastructure. So we're going to aim to push this up further, but I think it bodes well to if you tie that in with a good plan around supply, good plan around your uptake, I think we're feeling pretty confident that we should run a successful program, notwithstanding some of the challenges that the new variants pose. And that's, I guess, been a bit of a roller coaster. Probably feels like you've been drinking from a fire hose a little bit there. I think just to summarize the messages, South Africa clearly on the downturn, managed both wave 1 and wave 2 exceptionally well. Our health system never fell over. We've got challenges with variants, but many other countries are going to have equal challenges with variants. We just happen to be at the front of the variant science, but have a well-established vaccination program that looks like it should be successful, notwithstanding some of the challenges in both supply and in efficacy around the new variants. So I am going to stop there and happy to take some questions if helpful.
Ron, thank you so much. As usual, you always bring such a level of confidence and comfort to, I mean, I've heard Ron speak many times and I learn something new every time, but it definitely does sort of calm the anxieties that I know many of us are feeling. Ron, one of the questions was from Stephen asking if you could perhaps sketch a best and worst case scenario from a 30,000-foot view. Ron, Stephen, I think you're from the US, so specifically from a US perspective.
Yeah, so I think a few important things here. Firstly, what COVID has demonstrated for us is the scientific base in South Africa is world-class. Our scientists have been on the leading edge of all of the COVID research and have been toe-to-toe with the scientists across the globe throughout. And we're very proud of the contribution they've made along with the universities. I think the second thing that's played out in South Africa is the healthcare infrastructure has just been brilliant. And I think there's always been question marks around South Africa running a dual healthcare system, a private system and a public system. But I think in times of crisis, when you've got that surplus capacity in your healthcare system is terrific. And in fact, our clinicians have been amazing as part of the journey. So what's not well known is that South Africa was the first country to use dexamethasone. In fact, it was out of Johannesburg, a Prof. Guy Richards, who started testing dexamethasone at the end of March last year. And Guy was seeing amazing results. So I think science is good, healthcare infrastructure has been good. I think the third message is that variants are now part of our life for COVID. So when we started out on the COVID journey, all indications were that COVID would not create as many mutations as the flu virus has. COVID has mutated a lot faster than anyone anticipated. That impacts all countries globally. Everyone is going to be impacted around variants. In fact, the reason South Africa picked up the variant is because our scientists do regular genomic sequencing. I think in countries that don't do as much genomic sequencing, it's reasonable to expect that there are even more variants out there and there are more transmissible variants. So I think from a business perspective, globally, we are working against variants, no matter where you are in which country you work in. And I think you've got to be adaptable and moldable around figuring out ways around these variants. And then I think in addition to that, we've got to work with vaccine manufacturers around adapting the vaccines, running booster doses over time. So COVID has thrown us yet another curveball. Just as we thought we might be emerging, I think we kind of got a next phase of COVID ahead of us as a global populace.
Ron, one of the other questions that came up, the SA vaccination program has currently been halted. When do you think that this will resume?
Yeah, it's good news on that front. South Africa's done an amazing pivot already. I was on a call this morning. We've already secured 300,000 J&J doses with another 150,000 doses to come. I was on a call with Pfizer Global earlier on this afternoon. There's Pfizer doses coming into the country. So we're quickly going to supplement the AstraZeneca doses that you're perhaps not going to be as effective anymore. In addition to that, we're going to deploy the AstraZeneca doses against a study around it preventing moderate to severe disease. The study that the University of Witwatersrand did on the AstraZeneca vaccine was targeted at 31-year-olds and only looked at mild to moderate disease. We have a strong hypothesis that the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be effective against moderate and severe disease. So we've got 3 different programs rolling out simultaneously: J&J, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and I think we're going to learn tons coming out of that program. In addition to that, we've obviously we've got significant supply coming on downstream on the back of that. So we're back on track, to a greater or lesser degree.
Great. One of the other questions that came up from Andy was, could the E484K, hope I've said that correctly, variation evolve in another country on its own, or would it have had to have been transmitted by a carrier from the source country?
What a great question.
He's very clever, Andy.
Could be either. Could be either. You saw how the EEC variant, mutated on its own in the UK. Remember, that's a 501V1 variant, right, with an E484 mutation. So that arrived on its own in the UK. That was not introduced from South Africa. If that had come in from South Africa, it would have been a 501YV2 with an E484. So that gives you a clue on how the virus is mutating, and that specific mutation manifests on its own in the UK. And I think it gives you an indication that as the virus mutates, you will see the same variants arrive. Sometimes they are homegrown and sometimes they're imported. Great question.
Our UK and South African-based BPOs, everybody's raving about the contribution, but I won't go into all of those. But what is the position of SAHPRA on the vaccines, and what role does South Africa play in the changes needed in the vaccine for new variants? It's like a double question, actually.
So the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority follows the global, or it works in tandem with the likes of the FDA and the European regulators. So they work hand in hand. Typically, share insights and your findings, and share regulatory approvals. So I think that's the first point to note on SAHPRA. The second point to note on SAHPRA is that they have been extremely quick in approving vaccines for delivery in South Africa. So the AstraZeneca vaccine was approved in record time, and all indications are that Pfizer is going to be approved in record time as well. At the same time, and I think this is really important, is they have maintained quality standards. So they do not forgo on quality, which is amazing to see. So AstraZeneca vaccines arrived in South Africa a week ago. They are undergoing quality tests at the moment in Bloemfontein. Everyone's looking at was looking at the research. So those vaccines were not deployed until SAHPRA was entirely comfortable that they'd maintained their integrity and that they were going to be efficacious. And when they were found that they're not going to be efficacious, the minister and various scientists called an urgent media briefing Sunday night and said, look, sorry, these things are not going to work to our expectations. We're going to pull them. And I think that's a very, very brave move, and gives us a lot of confidence in not only our scientific community, but also our regulators.
And Ron, I think Andy might sort of join you in answering this question. Have the private medical aid schemes or business sectors got any plans underway to augment independently the vaccine rollout plans? We're hearing a lot of full sector talk about how they could help expedite millions of people receiving the vaccine quite rapidly, or do you think that's totally off the cards? Maybe you respond, and then Andy, if you could perhaps support Ron's answer on this. I know you are involved with that.
Yeah, so firstly, South Africa is driving a centralized response to procuring and distributing vaccines, same as every other country. So all countries are driving a government-led response around their vaccinations. South Africa is no different. And there's a few specific and important reasons for that. I think the first important reason is that quality is paramount. So what you will see over the next few months globally is there will be a proliferation of grey vaccine products that look like a vaccine, but won't be a vaccine. Unfortunately, there's quite a big grey market for vaccines. So you've got to be very, very cautious around quality imports. I think secondly, you've got to be able to work closely with the regulatory authorities, and in South Africa, you cannot use a vaccine that is not licensed for approval by SAHPRA in South Africa. So you cannot import a vaccine independently of all of the SAHPRA approvals. If you do that, and you are able to, in some shape or form, get the vaccine into the country, and you deliver that vaccine to your workforce, and something happens, you're personally liable, for the importation. So I think it's this sort of program is important to drive from a centralized perspective, from a quality and licensing perspective. And then I think there's a broader point around equity. So I think we feel quite strongly that we need to drive equitable rollout of vaccines across South Africa according to priority groups, and make sure that the vulnerable populations get vaccines first. So to answer your question, no independent import of vaccines at this stage. We're all hands on deck helping the government procure vaccines through a very well-structured private sector coordination effort under the banner of Business Unity South Africa and BSA.
I don't know if there was more that you wanted to add to that.
Just very briefly, I think to Ron's last point, which is under that coordinating structure of BUSA and B4SA and this collaborative effort, the sector certainly has offered support, but will take guidance from where, because there are a lot of criteria that need to be met, and that's, for example, can they provide facilities, etc., and all of that would go through a coordinated process. The sector is certainly going to play its role in disseminating approved communication that comes through that platform and that communication channel, so that we are part of communicating the facts. And the third thing is that the sector has put its hand up to use its capabilities to support government and business with the contact management aspect of the vaccine rollout program. That's very much in its infancy and still needs to be considered and go through the process, but it is a necessity to provide that level of communication support, and hopefully that's where business can again work closely with government to do something there. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Andy. Then several questions around, will we sort of in the future face a scenario where we would have to have an annual vaccine similar to the flu jab, Ron?
Yeah, if you'd asked me this question 2 months ago, I would have said yes. No. I think all the indications are, given the way the virus is mutating, we're likely to need booster doses going forward. And we're certainly, as Discovery Health, are preparing ourselves and saying, look, looks like corona is going to be endemic for a few more years, and it will certainly require boosters. Not sure on what population groups, not sure what boosters, but it certainly looks like it's headed in that direction. And that's going to be all of us across the globe. So I think we're all going to need coronavirus boosters.
Right. I think I'm sure there must be many follow-on questions, but Ron, thank you very, very much. If I'd had to try and articulate some of the information you covered today to our stakeholders, I definitely would have left them all asking lots more questions. And really, as Andy said at the beginning, we appreciate the partnership we have with Discovery Health and the work that you do to always be available to answer the questions we have, and really to give us peace of mind around how we navigate this very challenging time. I'll also apologize, I believe my sound hasn't been great, so I apologize for that. But thank you very much. I don't know if there are any last questions anyone else has. Andy, and I'll hand over to you to close out.
Ron, just again to echo what Fran said, and just looking at the chat, thank you very much. I think the fact-based presentation, your view ahead based on the data is exceptionally helpful. And one of the points was made earlier by Evan, it's exactly what today's session was intended for. We just want to make sure that our international investors, operators, clients, and stakeholders, understand, what we are doing as a country, and how that affects them and their population and doing business with us. And of course, the role that we are all playing in tackling this pandemic, both locally and globally. So thank you. It was of immense value, and we just look forward to playing our role as a sector in this journey through these structures that are now in place. Really appreciate it, and just on behalf of everyone, and thanks again to everyone who's made the time to listen in to Ron and build these insights, so we too can be properly informed and in terms of what's going on around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for hosting us.
Great, thanks very much, everyone. As mentioned, that recording will be made available. Tracy's put a note up there, and would encourage you just to share that with those who couldn't make the call, in a responsible way, and at least it will give them the insights that we now have been exposed to. So all the best with taking this forward, and we'll be in touch on any further developments in terms of the sector's role and support. Thank you, and thanks again, Ron. Thank you very much.